The way that we interact with our computers is through an operating system. No matter if you're on a desktop computer or a laptop, odds are you're using Windows, Mac OS, or Linux in order to use your computer. Let's talk about the topics that we're going to be covering in this video in regards to operating system components. So operating system components are what makes up the operating system. Very similar to how we have hardware in our desktop computers and our laptops, we have components within our operating system. Our operating system components are made up of a kernel, device drivers, services and processes, a GUI or a CLI, file systems, file extensions and attributes, as well as other components of an operating system like utilities and interfaces. We're also going to be exploring examples of common system services, but these here are our main aspects of our operating system components. These three here on screen are our operating systems. First is Windows, which is most common. About 80 to 90% of computers and laptops out there use Windows. Then we have Linux. Linux is not nearly as common on the consumer end, but it's very, very common, especially for hosting servers and for different things like that. You can get Linux on a laptop or on a desktop computer. It's just not as commonly used as Windows. Windows is by far the most common operating system. From there, we have Mac OS or Mac operating system. Mac OS is used on Apple devices such as a MacBook or a desktop version of a Mac computer. So how does an operating system actually work? Well, operating systems work by providing a user interface, either a GUI known as a graphical user interface or a command line interface known as a CLI. From there, through the UI, we interact with that user interface. When we interact with our user interface, it moves things to the file system, to the device drivers, all the way to the device kernel. The kernel in an operating system setting is a main part of an operating system that helps us manage hardware and software communication. So it helps the hardware that we have within our physical computer or our laptop communicate with the software side of things. The uses for this is for controlling CPU, memory, as well as devices that you have. It also helps us manage any programs that are running, and it helps us manage system resources. Overall, the kernel is incredibly important because it's an essential part of the operating system. It allows our operating system to function smoothly and for our overall computer to function well when we're using it. It also helps us ensure that any programs that we're running are being ran smoothly as well as securely. Here you can see an example of where the kernel interacts. As you can see, the kernel sits between the applications and the physical hardware on a computer. Here in green is the physical hardware, up top is the applications. For example, if we were running something like, say, Microsoft Word, Word would interact with the kernel, which would then interact with the hardware of our device to ensure that we're able to smoothly run that application. Device drivers are important pieces of software and programs that allow our operating system to communicate with our hardware. Device drivers are generally installed based on what type of device you have. So for example, if you had, let's say, a keyboard, you might need to download drivers directly from the manufacturer's website for your new keyboard to be able to properly interact with your computer, whether it's a laptop or a desktop. Now, not every single device needs drivers downloaded manually. Sometimes our computer can detect the device and automatically issue out a driver for that device to work. But if you're ever having trouble with any sort of hardware that you've just installed, or maybe you've had for a while, like a mouse, a scanner, a printer, a keyboard, whatever it is, if it's something that's connecting outside of your computer, you might want to check the device drivers, because overall, that's the use for drivers. They let hardware work properly. They enable our operating system to control the device. And it's important because if you don't have the drivers or the right drivers, your hardware is not going to work right. So that's a very, very important troubleshooting component, is if you're ever having issues with a physical device, make sure you ensure your device drivers are up to date and properly installed. Here you can see the operating system communicates with the software or the device drivers that we've installed, and it allows us to use our keyboard, our mouse, or any other physical device properly. From there, we have services and processes. And services and processes are essentially any program or software running in the background or at the forefront of our computer that allow our operating system or our applications to function. If you've ever used something like Task Manager, you've likely seen services and processes. When things start to go wrong, sometimes we have to close that service or process in order for it to close and restart. That way it can get working again. Services and processes are mainly used to run active programs and tasks. So again, if you can, and you're on a Windows computer right now, you can press Control-Alt-Delete on your keyboard and go to Task Manager, and you can actually look at services and processes and see exactly what I'm talking about. But these services help us run in the background to support our device functions, and processes run our active program and tasks. It's incredibly important because each helps keep our system running smoothly, and it allows things to work properly. Next up is our graphical user interface and our command line interfaces. GUIs, or GUIs as they're known, are used for icons, windows, menus. Essentially anything that you see on your screen and you can actually click is some sort of interface. Websites have interfaces, Programs have interfaces. Almost everything that you do nowadays on a modern laptop and computer is through a GUI or graphical user interface. Additionally, we have CLIs or command line interfaces. These are more text-based that uses commands in order for us to control a system, get some sort of information, or overall interact with our device. Overall uses for these two, like I mentioned earlier, GUIs allow us to easily navigate things, and command line interfaces are used for more advanced level things. These are important because they make things more user-friendly on the GUI side, and on the CLI side, it gives far more control and a lot more access to information and data. Here's an example of a command line interface. You could see here someone ran a command DRI, and it's shown a bunch of different information. Command line interfaces are very useful when you need to interact with the system at a very, very specific level that you can't interact with through, say, a GUI or a graphical interface. Here's another example down at the bottom. You can see this person is issuing out ping commands to ping IP addresses to see if they're up. So there's a lot of different things that you can do through a command line interface. They're very, very commonly used in IT, and they're very commonly used when troubleshooting. For example, if you're working on an office computer and the computer loses internet connection, the physical side of things is all good, you've restarted the computer, you verify that everything is good, it might be the best bet to start looking within the actual command line interface to see connectivity. For example, you can issue out, like this person did here, a ping command to see if you're actually able to get information out onto a network. Here's a common example of a graphical interface, just a basic Windows display here. You can see we can navigate to a bunch of different things. There's a lot of different areas we can click, and overall, everything that we use nowadays is some sort of graphical interface. File systems are a way an operating system allows us to use, store, and manage files and data on a device. So for example, if you're using a desktop computer, that desktop computer is going to have some form of storage linked directly to that computer. More often than not, that storage is located directly within the case of the computer, but you're able to interact with that storage by using an operating system through file systems. File systems are used for files and folders, controlling data, managing disk space, and accessing anything that's located on a local storage drive. File systems are important because they allow us to find and use our files easily and correctly. Additionally, they help us ensure that data is being stored efficiently and securely. And one last thing, because we have file systems on our operating system, it also makes it a little bit easier to troubleshoot things when they go wrong. As far as file extensions and attributes, you've definitely seen these before in your life. File extensions show the file type, so a .txt, .jpeg, .exe, whatever file type you're working with, that's the extension. File attributes, on the other hand, help us understand how a file was made, how it interacts with our computer, how it can be accessed, as well as how it can be used. Usually file attributes have quite a bit of information about the file as a whole, and it's one of the best places to look because on most operating systems, you can just right-click on the file and go to file attributes and learn more about that specific file. For uses, file extensions help the operating system understand which program is opening a file, and for file attributes, it helps us get more information about the file, as well as add any sort of control mechanism like locking a file or adding permissions. These are both important because they help the operating system handle files correctly, and they prevent accidental changes or deletion of important files when permissions and proper security are applied. Here's some examples of file extensions: docx, .xlsx for Excel files, .pdf, .jpeg, .powerpoint, .mp4, .zip, .mp3, .exe, .html, and .txt. These are all very, very common file extensions. And if you want to, you can pause the video now to go through your files and look at what extensions they have, which show you exactly what files they are. For example, MP4 files are video files, MP3 files are audio files, and so on and so forth. And here's an example of a file attribute. You can see here we have a general tab, a security tab, a details tab, and a previous versions tab. And there's a ton of different information on this file here. We can see the location of where the file is stored on our computer, what the size of the file is, when the file was created, when it was modified, when it was last accessed, what attributes we have for actually editing the file. So if we have read-only attributes, or if the file is supposed to be hidden, we have advanced attributes we can set. In the security tab, we would see a lot more information, but this is a basic example of a file attribute. Let's now recap exactly what we've learned about in this video. First, we learned about the three main operating systems: Windows, macOS, and Linux. They control almost everything on our computer. No matter which operating system we use, Our operating system is our bridge between our hardware and our software. Our operating systems consist of a kernel, which is the main part of our operating system that controls important hardware communicating directly with the operating system, such as the CPU, memory, and other hardware that you might find within a computer or a laptop case. Our device drivers are software that allow our operating system to communicate with our specific hardware devices, like our keyboards, our mouses, our printers, our monitors, and any other hardware we have. Services and processes are background programs and running tasks, either in the background or the forefront, that allow us to keep our system and our applications working properly. Remember, with our services and our processes, we can see those directly in Task Manager. So if you haven't already, go ahead, pause the video. If you're on Windows, open up Task Manager through Control-Delete and look at some of those services and processes. We also covered GUIs and CLIs. Remember, graphic interfaces or GUIs allow us to interact with the system using windows, icons, different types of things on screen that we can actually click visually. And CLIs allow us to use typed text commands to get information, run any sort of advanced features for our computer, and more. File systems are operating system way of storing and managing all the files on our device and the storage that we have for that device. Lastly, file extensions and attributes. File extensions help us identify what type of file something is, like a docx file for a Word file, or a JPEG for an image, or an MP4 for a video file, and our file attributes help us understand what information we have about a file, and they allow permissions to be set for that file. All these components come together to create our operating system. Everything from interacting with our hardware to managing our files and data to running applications to storage. Overall, the main thing that you need to know is each of these components make up our operating system.